I know I'm like a week late on this and nobody cares anymore, but in my defense, I was supposed to see the movie like the day after it came out, but I got sick, so I absolved myself of any blame. Anyways, yeah, the Backrooms, and it sure was a movie that happened. Similar to my other reviews of stuff, this isn't going to be like a one-to-one synopsis of what happened in the movie, so much as a proper review about like what I liked, what I didn't, all that good stuff. This is also going to be a review with spoilers, at least minor ones, a little I do a little synopsizing, if that's a word, later on, but not too much. So viewer discretion advised if you haven't seen the movie yet and you want to go into it with a blank slate. Also, for the record, I did write this script as everything came to mind, so if this review is kinda disjointed, I'm not sorry. So starting off, the cinematography in this movie is fucking gorgeous. The entire visual presentation, the camera work, everything really, really good. I loved the stark contrast between the majority of the movie and the grainy, like super 90s camcorder footage, which one of my biggest worries going into this was that there would be kind of like an over-reliance on the handheld camera footage and that whole like aesthetic. There's a kind of like analog aesthetic, and there really wasn't. It was used like pretty sparingly, and all of its uses worked perfectly, I think. Without going too much into the actual plot and doing the whole synopsis thing I just said I wasn't going to do, the majority of the Backrooms is centered around two characters, a divorced furniture salesman Clark and his therapist Mary. I think the character and world building in this movie is fantastic. Both Clark and Mary feel relatively fleshed out. I think the scenes early on, before we get into like the actual Backrooms elements of Clark attending therapy, do wonders to kind of establish his character and his motives and how he is, which I guess we'll touch on that a little more later. Other than those two, the other two, like, main-ish characters, Kat and Bobby, the young couple working for Clark, are, like, alright. At least from my perspective, they don't feel that important in a way. They're perfectly likable characters and all, but from the trailers, I think I just kind of expected them to be more important and more from them. They kind of just existed as this like narrative device to show that the Backrooms are actually dangerous and not just like the place equivalent of, you know, your headphones dying in the middle of a road trip and you have nothing else to do. But I just kind of struggled to feel any attachment to either of them. Really, Bobby dying, though, was the only, like, thrilling part of the first half of the movie or so, which, like, it's gonna sound weird, but I like that. I like that the first half of the movie was boring and, I don't want to say uneventful, but less eventful. Maybe I'm just glazing, but to me that feels like the point of the Backrooms. Which actually lets me segue into my next point, which is that this movie avoids all of the biggest fears I had going into it. As a concept, the Backrooms aren't about some scary entity chasing you at all times. Hell, the quote from the original Backrooms post from however long ago goes, "God save you if you hear something wandering around nearby, because it sure as hell has heard you." The entire concept of the Backrooms wasn't the, like, SCP entity style hide-and-seek thing that seemed to dominate so many of the fan games and stories and all of that, but the concept that you might not be alone in this infinite labyrinth of nothingness, rooms full of nothingness and beige walls and terrible fluorescent lights. I was cautiously optimistic, given that the director of the movie, Kane Parsons, spearheaded the YouTube series that really made the concept mainstream, and they knocked it out of the park. Yes, there are entities and actual threats in the Backroom movie and chase sequences and all that, but they're not there just to be there. They exist perfectly within the concept of the film and take more of a psychological avenue, which was really what I was hoping for, and I'm so glad that it ended up that way. I think it worked perfectly. I liked Mary as a character, but I will say that her development and backstory, which dealt a lot with her mother's instability and paranoia, it kind of felt confusing to me. I'm not sure if that's really the right word to use, but I felt like the story was at its weakest when it was focusing on her and her past. That's not to say that the backstory was weak or anything, it just felt like something that wasn't fleshed out enough to me to really be invested, in comparison to Clark's divorce being the main catalyst to show how off-kilter he is. It served as sort of like a why and a rationale for his behavior and actions, why being alone with his subconscious in the back rooms turned him into what he turned into while he was there. Whereas Mary's just kind of felt like it was there for the sake of it, to give her like something to play off of. Again, not that it was bad per se, but definitely the weakest part of the movie in my opinion, and probably the worst thing I have to say about it. Sorry, I thought there was a spider on my wall. I was about to jump out of my seat. I know I praised the visual presentation earlier, but I legitimately feel the need to do so again, because it really makes this movie, especially the first half. It, along with the incredible usage of ambiance and sound in general, really put this feeling of like dread in the air in every scene. It was about the implication that something could happen more so than something actually happening. Like, there was a sense of impending dread for a majority of the movie. Finally, I want to talk about the thing that really makes this movie for me, the dinner scene. Everything about this scene, and really from this scene onward until the last few minutes of the movie, are fucking incredible. Genuinely no notes. Basically, Mary ends up tied to a chair in a kitchen table in the back rooms, surrounded by Clark and some very weird mannequins, one of which is meant to represent his ex-wife. The mannequins are deformed and legitimately unsettling in a lot of ways. I don't want to use the word, or like the term, uncanny valley, because that's not really accurate. They're not meant to look like human, but slightly off. As much as like melted, grotesque versions of people. Think like if you had a wax statue of someone and like took a lighter to it for a few minutes, like their face would kind of melt. Like, some of the features would be really distorted. Regardless, this is kind of supposed to represent the corrosion of memory as you, like, are stuck in the back rooms. The longer time goes on, the more memories of these people blend together, yada yada yada. By this point, and pretty much until the end of the movie, my fists were clenched. Like, every now and then, when the camera panned to Mary, the mannequin behind her would move ever so slightly, and it fucked with my head really bad. Anyways, Clark is effectively role-playing the argument he had with his wife the night that she walked out, or kicked him out, I guess. That is very important. She didn't walk out, she kicked him out, because that's like a big part of why he's so angry. And instead of going along with it, Mary calls him out. And without getting too much into my own life or anything like that, this scene genuinely felt cathartic in a way. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, but like, Mary is risking death at the hands of who is effectively a deranged madman who's lost like all grip of reality, and she still lays into him. She calls him out for his behavior and how he deflects every single problem he has onto someone else, how everything is someone else's fault, how he refuses to change and excuses it as being wired that way. Again, I know I said I wouldn't really do any sort of synopsis stuff, but this scene was incredibly powerful, easily my favorite part of the movie, and I kind of felt like to explain why I like this movie so much, I really needed the gravity of that scene to be like laid out and my perspective of it. From there we go way off the fucking rails. A big ass Clark mannequin comes out of the dark and eats Clark. Mary is able to escape, and a big old chase scene ensues. Again, like I said, my fists were clenched basically from the dinner scene onward. The anticipation that this sequence built was genuinely incredible. There was so much dread and so much, and like I said, anticipation. I absolutely loved it. The movie wraps up with a bunch of dudes in hazmat suits seemingly dragging Mary out of the back rooms, where she ends up in supposedly a like psychiatric evaluation with some guy who says that he himself has been in the back rooms and like kind of empathizes with her in that way. But after some back and forth and her zoning out, it cuts to Mary sitting in a chair in the back rooms again, and the camera pans. Her face is all contorted and grotesque like the mannequins from earlier, and roll credits. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, the ending was kind of whatever for me. Like I touched on, I just wasn't really that interested in Mary's character arc that much, and I feel like it left me with more questions than answers, which is to their credit, probably the intended purpose. I'd be very surprised if this movie doesn't get a sequel with how successful it's been so far, and if it hasn't already been announced, I very well could have missed it. But yeah, that's the Backrooms. Well worth the price of admission, in my opinion. If you like psychological horror and or liminal space stuff and or scary monster chase sequences, I'd check it out. It checks all of the boxes in that aspect, and while there's some stuff I'm not the biggest fan of, obviously, like I talked about, overall, this was a really fun watch, and I do say that as someone who doesn't tend to enjoy sitting down and watching movies. Like, I prefer to do pretty much anything else. On that note, a side note and a quick little rant, but dear God, going to the movies is such a jarring experience these days. Between 2 tickets, popcorn, and 2 drinks, my buddy and I spent upwards of $50 at the theater. Like, that is just so insane to me. Like, I love the theater experience. It's such a fun time whenever I go, but it's so difficult to justify. Like, we got froyo afterwards, and I'm fairly certain that shit cost less than 2, like, they're larges, but they're decently sized cups. For drinks at the theater. That was like, I think that was like $16. Ridiculous, man. I always make a point to say, whenever I review anything at all, but I am no professional whatsoever. I know jack shit about filmmaking, or directing, or writing, or anything, even remotely related to that. Like I just said, I'm not a movie guy, even. I really don't usually watch movies. At the end of the day, I am just some rando on the internet saying whatever the hell comes to my head. I just kind of felt like talking about this movie I watched. So take everything I say with a metric ton of salt, and note that this is my own personal opinion, so please be nice. I'm just a boy. I was born 5 minutes ago. I just got here. But that's gonna be all from me for now. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you subscribed the video, leave a subscribe. Let me know if you want to see more review type stuff on the channel. I really do love doing it. It lets me deep dive into something that I probably ordinarily wouldn't have put this much thought into. I would have left the theater and gone, oh yeah, that was pretty good, I like that movie. But until next time, I'm out of here.